All righty. Well, welcome everybody to the new buyer representation agreement. But of course, it's not the buyer representation agreement. It's the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement, because C.A.R. has changed the name and made some changes to the form. So the BRE or BRNE or there were three other forms. They're all gone and have been replaced by this form. The fundamental concepts don't change, but we will spend a little bit more time going into the mechanics of what it's doing, how it's doing, that sort of thing. I do encourage you to use the chat. Please put your questions in there. I will stop periodically as I see questions build in the chat, or when I go from section to section, certainly from page to page in the document. The document is now only 3 pages, but there are some additional addenda, and I've actually put those into the PowerPoint handout. Both a PowerPoint handout and a copy of the new contract. A link to it has been put in to the chat, so you can go into the chat and download those. Of course, if you have any questions at the end of the class, you're welcome to email me, okay? And my email address is in the PowerPoint handout. The only thing I want to warn you about is I cannot give you legal advice. I am now an inactive member of the state bar. I no longer actively practice law, although I am still a member of the state bar, okay? I just don't practice law anymore. All right, so everything is good there in the chat. Let's go ahead and start going through the material. And here we go. If I can get this right. All right. So a little introduction to the BRBC, buyer representation, broker compensation form. You now have 2 options. One form, you can either make it exclusive representation or non-exclusive representation, all right? Now, last year, okay, before they changed this form, you had 3 choices. You had buyer representation not for compensation. You had buyer representation non-exclusive, and buyer representation exclusive, okay? The buyer representation not for compensation, it's gone. Forget about it. Doesn't exist, can't exist, not there, okay? This form that we're going to go in, the default language, in other words, what happens if you don't check a box? The default language is non-exclusive representation. What that means is you need to be showing the buyer the property in a meaningful way. Okay, you have to have discussed the property with the buyer, showed them the property, and then if they buy that property during this agreement, you're entitled to be paid. However, if they find the property on their own, they go to an open house, or let's say you emailed them a listing through the C.A.R. MLS drip system, right? You set them up and they just get emails, but you never talk to the buyer about the property and they buy it through somebody else, you don't get paid, okay? That's the non-exclusive representation. And that's how this form is set up, unless you check the box. If you check the box, then you will have the exclusive representation. What that means is, if the buyer buys the property during the terms of the agreement, either through you, through another agent, for sale by owner, doesn't matter, you get paid. Now, the way I'm going to teach this class is I'm going to ask you to check that box so that we have exclusive representation. Here's my thinking. If you're going to take a listing, you take an exclusive right to sell. You do not take an open listing. And frankly, the non-exclusive representation is essentially an open listing, right? And you're going to have to prove procuring costs. And let me tell you, for somebody who's got like, 40 years experience in law, you don't want to have to prove procuring cause because it's not an easy item to prove, okay? It is not. So we are going to run under exclusive representation. Now, for those of you who came in early, you will recall that I had a chat with your executive officer, and we were kind of joking about whether or not to use this form. And I actually had a conversation with somebody in realtor organization who didn't really think a lot of this form. He thought buyers should remain loyal to you based on the service you provide. To which I tongue-in-cheek responded, then you should take verbal listings, right? We don't take verbal listings. We take written listings. Why? Because we want a written contract with ourselves. And we don't take open listings, at least most of us don't. We take exclusive right to sales because that's going to afford us, one, the greatest amount of protection, but two, it allows us to give the greatest amount of service to the buyer, which I mean, to the seller. Likewise, I'm advocating for exclusive representation because it gives you the greatest amount of protection. You're going to go to the trouble of getting them to sign this agreement. You might as well do the agreement that gives you the greatest protection. But more importantly, from the buyer's perspective, it's going to give them the greatest amount of service. It allows you to provide them with the greatest amount of service. Okay, so exclusive representation is conceptually like an exclusive right to sell. Instead of with the seller, it's going to be with the buyer, right? The seller sells their property without you, and you have an exclusive right to sell listing, you'll get paid. If the buyer buys a property without you, and you have the buyer representation, broker compensation, exclusive representation with that buyer, you'll get paid. All right, same concept. I also want to invite all of you into a role play. The way it will work is you put your scenario, your concern, your objection, what it is you're worried about, why you don't want to use this form into the chat. And I will show you, I will give you a script on how to overcome that objection, okay? And I firmly believe that there is no objection that cannot be overcome, right? So before we get into the form, let's start with the script. And this is my introduction of this agreement to a buyer. And it's going to go something like this. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity to work with you in finding your new home. You know, helping buyers find their new home is probably one of the most rewarding things I do in my real estate profession. I love seeing the joy of buyers deciding that this is the perfect house, what the benefits it's going to provide for their families. I mean, it just really gives me a warm fuzzy. And it's what's make my job worthwhile. However, I do my job a little differently than some agents, not to disparage the way other agents do their job, but I view my representation of you at the highest level, okay? When I enter into an agreement with a buyer to find them a property, I take that relationship seriously. The law describes it as a fiduciary relationship, which is the highest duty at law. And I fear sometimes that some of the people in my profession don't always look at it that way, but it's very important to me. And because it's so important to me, I like to have a written agreement that spells out what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it and the benefits I provide for you. I think it's very important that you come into this relationship working with me with a full understanding of what I'm going to be doing, what my authority is, what my powers are. All right. Now, interestingly, I see some buyers and they kind of want to know why. And and sometimes I'll even run into a buyer who says, you know, I'd like to call the agent whose name is on the for sale sign, thinking that they're going to get a better deal. What they don't understand is the agent whose name is on that for sale sign out in front of the seller's house, that agent has a written agreement with the seller to get the seller the best deal, but not the buyer. It's like if you were charged with a crime, would you ask the district attorney to represent you? The answer is, of course not. You want your own attorney. And that's why I think it's so important that you have your own agent, your own brokerage firm that's representing you. And that authority is given to me by this agreement. And after you say that, and after you go through that, and I really like that hook where you talk about the agent representing the seller and the importance of somebody charged with a crime having their own attorney, I think it really sets into their brain the importance of having their own agent, because this is a big transaction for them. All right. Let me jump into the chat, see what's going on in there. Okay. Please send me a copy of your script to overcome objections. Jacqueline, I'm going to give them to you as you present them. I don't know what your objections are. I'm going to anticipate the objections as we go through the form. But if there's something there that I miss, I need you to say it in the chat. Just as if I was giving a live course, I would need you to raise your hand and let me know what those objections are. All right? Okay, so let's go ahead and go into the agreement. Before we do, I need to talk about two disclosure documents. The first one is the AD form, or the agency disclosure form. Now, we all know this form, right? Okay. The law says that this form has to be signed by the principal before agency is created. So with the seller, the law requires the seller to sign this form before they sign the listing. If you allow a seller to sign a listing agreement before they sign this form, you are in violation of Civil Code 2079. All right. With the buyer, you have to have the buyer sign this form before you become their agent. And of course, if we're not using a written buyer representation agreement, we don't really know when we become the buyer's agent, do we? We are certainly the buyer's agent before they sign that offer, which is why most agents get this form signed right before they sign the offer. But if you're using the buyer representation broker compensation form that we're going to go over today, you need to remember the buyer has to sign this form first. Then they can sign that buyer representation agreement. All right. Failure to do so, you are in violation of Civil Code 2079, because the buyer representation agreement that we're going to discuss today creates an agency relationship with the buyer. This form does not create agency. It merely explains the difference between single agency and dual agency. It is a disclosure. Next form, possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, the BRBC. Now, this form is not required by law like the agency disclosure form was, okay? Agency disclosure form required by statute. This form, however, is required by the contract. The listing agreement, the buyer representation agreement, the purchase agreement. It says that this form was given. So this form has to be the very second form the seller or the buyer signs, because all those contractual forms that you're using says that they signed this form. All right. So you need to get them to sign this form. What does this form do? It does two things. The first thing it does is it says if you're representing two buyers who are looking for essentially the same property, that's okay. I mean, we really don't know what that is. Is that dual agency? No. What is it? Nobody knows. But this form says it's okay. The second thing this form says is if you find yourself in a situation, let's say you're representing a buyer and that buyer wants to write an offer on a listing by somebody in your company, you've got to go into dual agency then. What if your buyer says, wait a minute. I read something on the internet that says dual agency is bad. I don't want you to be a dual agent. now you really got a problem, because basically you've got to refer that buyer to some other company because you can't represent them, because if you do, you're in dual agency because your broker determines agency. If your broker's in dual agency, you're going to be in dual agency. This form says it's okay. This form says if the buyer, or the seller for that matter, has to go into dual agency, it's okay. All right. So it's really important to get this form signed early on. Where do we see this form signed? In escrow. It doesn't do any good. Yeah, but I'm not going to get paid by my broker unless I get all the forms signed in the file. My gosh, if you're going to get the documents signed, get them signed where they're going to protect you. Have this form signed by your buyer before you start showing them property, or agents taking listings. Have this form signed by your seller before you list the property. So the form can help you. If you're going to get the form signed, you might as well get it to help you. All right, let me go into the chat, see what's going on. Okay, I know that, like your script. Okay, again, I'm not even going to tell you how many decades I've been in this business. I try to get it right. I try to think like an agent, okay? I am a real estate broker, but I work full-time at Mount SAC. But if I'm not hitting the thing right for you, let me know, because we're going to work this out. We're going to make it comfortable for you to use the buyer representation broker compensation form. Okay, so it's now a 3-page form. Here is the first page, and we're going to go through it section by section. If you got a question, you've got a concern, you're worried about an objection, put it in the chat. Let me know. With the listing agreement, you've got 3 objections, right? You've got price, you've got term, and you've got commission. With the buyer representation broker compensation form, you only have 2 objections. Commitment, committing to you with an agreement, and commission. So there's only 2 objections, and I'm going to show you how to overcome those objections. Just going back to that listing agreement, you better have responses for those 3 objections that I just mentioned. Going on a listing appointment and hoping the seller does not bring up the objection is not a plan. You have to have a plan dealing with those 3 objections. And if Laura brings me back to do the listing agreement, I'll show you how to deal with those objections too. All right. Okay, so let's get into this agreement. Paragraph 1, representation period and right to represent. So you need to put down the names of all of your buyers, okay? Anybody who is a buyer or a potential buyer, that could be an in-law, could be a parent, a brother, a sister, right? Maybe a child for an older buyer, right? Anybody that is a potential buyer, you want to put their name in there. Now, following the new purchase agreement, these forms should interact the same way. So if you don't have enough room in that line, you should be able to continue writing, and the TOP form should apply itself. The TOP form is a new C.A.R. form that came about last year, which allows you to put additional caricatures into a space where there's not enough room, right? If you're completing it online. And then on the second line, you put the name of your broker, not your name. Remember, you are not the agent. The broker is the agent. So you put your broker's name there, or if they're doing business as, okay? Beginning on would be typically the date you're filling this out. And then ending, so we don't have a date this document ends. It's so many days. Okay. And remember, with all C.A.R. forms, it's days after. So tomorrow is always day 1. So if you put in 1 day, it would be 11:59 p.m. tomorrow night. Okay. So when we do our calendar days, it's always calendar days, unless a deposit, then it's business days. But when we're doing our days, Today is day 0. Tomorrow is day 1, right? And that's true with all the C.A.R. contracts. All right. So you need to put your time period here. And this is your first objection. I call it commitment. All right. The buyer does not want to commit to you. Now, back in the old days, last year, we could make it for just today, day 0. Okay. Can't really do that anymore. I guess you might be able to put 0 days later, and then it would end at 11:59 p.m. today. I think you're going to have to put 1 there. Again, I don't think C.A.R. leadership actually uses this form. I don't think they've worked through all the objections that my students have given me to this form. So the shortest amount of period you're going to put down is 1 day, may be able to put 0 days. So it would end 0 days later at 11:59. My reading of that would be, it'll end at midnight tonight. Okay, if you put 0 there. If you want to play it on the safe side, since we don't have a ruling from C.A.R. on this, put down 1 day. All right, put down 1 day. All right. So what does that mean? Well, here's your script with a buyer. Your buyer's going to say to you, gee, Laura, Linda, Eunice, Jean, Marina. See, I can see some of your names. You seem like a really nice person. I like you. I just don't want to have a long-term commitment with you. What if things don't work out? What if you don't like each other? You don't want a long-term commitment. That's how you handle it. Put down 0 days. Put down 1 day. It means it ends at midnight tonight. It ends tomorrow at midnight. No long-term commitment. How do you feel about that? I would challenge a buyer to come up with a reason why they would not enter into this agreement for just 1 day. Okay, just 1 day. All right. We're going to get to the protection period. And in the protection period, you can list the number of days after the expiration of this agreement that you are protected on any property you show that buyer. You just need to notify that buyer in writing, you can use email, of the properties you showed them. So let's say we make it for 0 days, so it's only good for today. That's kind of my interpretation of this contract, all right? Then it expires at midnight tonight. So after you show them properties today, you either prepare a letter. C.A.R. actually has a form to use, but I think the form's a little impersonal. I would use a letter or an email. And it's going to go something like this. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, thank you so much for affording me the opportunity to show you properties today. I really appreciate you sharing with me what you're looking for in your next home. Just to refresh, the properties you saw were, and then you have to list all of the properties. And then you say, if you have any questions about these properties, please let me know. I will follow up with you in a couple of days to see where you are, to see if you'd like to look at some additional properties. Thank you very much. Ed Estes, Mount Sacramento. That's all you do. If they buy any of those properties, either through another agent on their own, doesn't matter, you're entitled to commission under the safety clause, which is in this agreement. Based on that, you shouldn't have a property making this agreement for just 1 day or 2 days, because you know that any properties you show them, you're going to be protected on. Likewise, they should not have a problem in agreeing to work with you on these properties since you introduced them to him. And if they do have an objection, you ask them why. Your script goes something like this. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I'm a little confused by your concern. If I'm able to find you the property that you want to purchase, I don't understand why you would not afford me the honor of representing you. Then be quiet. Don't say a word. Make them tell you. They won't. but I'll tell you what it is. Well, Ed, Linda, Laura, our niece just got her real estate license about 3 weeks ago, and she's been showing us property, but she doesn't know what she's doing. We're afraid she's missed some stuff. So we would like you to go out there, see if you can find something that we like better that she missed, so we can have her representing us buying the property. And because we're being recorded, I will not tell you what I'm thinking of saying, right? You know what I'm thinking. Okay, make them verbalize that with you. And now you know that this is not a buyer. This is not a legitimate buyer. You will never get this buyer as your client. Tell them goodbye, all right? Don't waste your time with them, because now you know. And that's what this agreement's going to do. It's going to force your prospective buyers to legitimize themselves, all right? Okay, going down to number 2 real quick, then we're gonna go back into the chat, okay? No pre-existing buyer representation or broker compensation contract. It means that the buyer is stating they don't have an agreement with another agent, that other agent is representing them, okay? Or if they do, they have to disclose it. Now, if it is a non-exclusive, okay, fine, talk about non-exclusive a little bit later. But if they do have an agreement, they need to end that agreement, or you need to tell them, I can't represent you if they're already representing you, because if you buy a property through me, you may owe them a commission, right? Okay, so you have to make them disclose that. Let me go into the chat real quick. Again, at what point do you send the letter with the list of properties after the BRBC expires? I would do it on the day it expires. Now, this contract, I believe, allows a 5-day grace period where you can send it. I have to confess, this is my first time teaching this new form. It does give you a grace period, but I would do it on the day. I do it on the day because it's fresh in your mind. You don't want to procrastinate until tomorrow or the next day, because if you procrastinate one day, you'll procrastinate 3, 4, 5, 6 days, and then you may miss your window, okay? So my recommendation is do it on the same day, okay? There's no benefit in procrastinating, okay? Do it on the same day. Keep them from working with another agent, all right? Another thing, should I check paragraph 18? We're going to take the paragraph one paragraph at a time, okay? I can't be running back and forth in the agreement. Okay, paragraph 3, property to be acquired, okay? Now, location. You want to make it broad, but not too broad, okay? Earth, too broad, right? California. Well, your license is good in the whole state, but still too broad. About as broad as you'd want to be is C.A.R. MLS, because really can effectively represent somebody outside of C.A.R. MLS, right? Your multiple listing service. You can do it by cities. I don't like cities because cities are pretty small, okay? Cities are pretty small. I mean, you might say, okay, Walnut, Diamond Bar, West Covina, but then they buy something in Covina, West Covina, but Covina, and this document wouldn't apply. So what you might do, because you are the Tri-Counties Association, you might use Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Riverside, Orange, whatever area you work, okay? Or you might just say C.A.R. MLS. Now, you could do a specific property. I've seen situations where a buyer comes up to an agent and says, I want you to represent me in buying that house. I want that house, and I want you to write the offer on that house. And they give you the address. Okay. You could put that location in. But generally, you want to be a little broader. So give it a broad area, but not too broad. Like I said, California, too broad, right? Same thing with price range. You want it broad, but you don't want too broad. You don't want to be $1 to $10 million. I mean, if it was ever challenged, a judge will look at that and say, what are you talking about here? So I would do something like this. Find out what's their price range. What are they looking for? Well, let's say they're looking for a property at $800,000. Okay. Would they be interested in living in a $500,000 home? Absolutely not. Can they possibly qualify for anything at $1.1 million? No. So you might do a 400,000 to 1.2 million. Okay. So you've got a range there. 400,000, they wouldn't live in that house. 1.2 million, they'd never be able to afford that property. Okay. So that would be my range, right? It's impossible for them to buy above it. They'd never live in a property below it. That's how I handle that range. And of course, C.A.R. is famous for putting in other, because we may have other, right? We don't know what it's going to be. That's why they put down other. But if you need to tweak the document, you've got other, all right? Or under 3B, you can list specific properties, okay? Like I said before, if your buyer is coming out of a 1031 tax deferred exchange, right? They may be identifying 3 properties for you, which means you might have 3C, a certain list with 3 properties listed. Okay? So again, the form gives you a certain amount of flexibility. Don't see anything in the chat, so we're going to move on. Okay, here comes our next objection. Compensation. The buyer doesn't want to pay a commission. All right. So let's talk about this, and I'm going to do my best to stay on the right side of the line. I'm sure Linda will catch me if I go on the wrong side of the line. Let's see how I do here. Okay, so the first thing we note in 10-point bold type, which is required under the statute of frauds, that a notice that commissions are not fixed by law and are negotiable. Okay, the law requires that to be there either in red print or 10-point bold font. Okay, then under 4A, buyer agrees to pay the broker as follows. Okay, so A1, a percent. A2, a fixed amount. Or A3, a schedule. You go, what's a schedule? If any of you have done commercial leasing, all right, then you understand that compensation to agents representing tenants or landlords on commercial leases typically get a percentage based on the term of the lease, and it is diminishing. They might get X% for the first year, Y% for the 2 and 3rd year, and Z% for the 4th and 5th year. Okay, it's a schedule. C.A.R. has provided the opportunity to do that here. Would you ever be doing it? I don't think so. What are you going to do? You're going to put in a percent. Okay, so we're going to focus in on 4A1. What is that percent? Right? Okay, commissions are negotiable. I am not a real estate agent. Yeah, I have a broker's license, but I'm not a real estate agent. I don't represent buyers, sellers, tenants, landlords. Right? But I need to explain what number you're going to put in there. The number you're going to put under 4A1 is the number that you would like to see offered to you in the MLS. So when you look up a listing in the MLS, you look down to find out what the commission they're offering you. And you know it varies, right? Could be 3, could be 2.5, could be 2, could be $2.50. I mean, it runs the gamut, right? Because commissions are negotiable. What do you want to see there? And only you can answer that. And I'm not going to tell you what it should be, because that would be a violation of antitrust laws. But it's what you would want to see. Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 2.5. I don't care. I really don't care. But whatever number you want to see there, that's what you will be putting under 4A1. Now, when you take a listing, you charge the seller a commission, and it's frequently about double that. Why? Because you're sharing that with the agent who has the buyer. You're not sharing this with another brokerage firm. You're not sharing this with the agent that has the seller. You have the buyer. The question is, how much do you want? Representing the buyer, your side of the transaction. And that's the number you're going to want to put down. All right. So hopefully that makes sense to you. I'm going to go in the chat and see if I stepped in any dog poop. All right. Oh, fortunately, it's just Laura posting things. So sounds like I'm still on the right side of the law. You know, I'm happy to talk commissions with you privately by email or whatever, but I'm very sensitive about doing it in a classroom because I want to make sure I do not cross the line into recommending an amount that you should be charging. All right. Now, the objection that's going to come here is something like, you know, I thought you got paid by the seller. Why do you want to charge me when you're supposed to be paid by the seller? I don't understand. To which you say, later in this agreement, and I'll show it to you, it states that if I'm being compensated by the seller, that will offset what you owe me. So you don't have to pay anything. Now, the concern often comes up if you were to hypothetically put 3% under 4A1, and what's coming through the MLS is 2.5%, would the buyer contractually owe the difference? You're getting 2.5 from the MLS and it owes you 3. Or you put 2.5 under 4A1 and you're getting 2% from the MLS. Would the buyer owe the difference? Under this contract, yes, they would. But this is how I would handle it. Before you show the buyer the property, certainly before you write an offer, you have an obligation under this agreement to let them know what the seller is paying you and if they owe the difference. But if you're happy with what's being offered through the MLS, let's say you put 3% here in the purchase agreement, this agreement right here, but the seller is only, or the listing agent, I should, not the seller, the listing agent is only offering 2.5%. You let the buyer know you're comfortable in accepting that 2.5, that you're not going to charge them the difference. And that's a conversation you need to have with your broker or your manager as well. All right. Is your company good for waiving? And if so, how much are you allowed to waive? Okay. So you have to have that conversation. This is a great topic for an office meeting. Just let your manager or broker know you want to have this as a topic so they can prepare for it. Don't catch them flat-footed. All right. They may want to watch this recording too. All right. So that's something you need to have an agreement on in your office. Okay. Now, you heard me say 3, and I know 3 is high. Yeah, in this market, 3 is high. I know that. But I do like to go a little high under 4A1 because this agreement allows me to represent buyers with for sale by owners and unlisted properties. And if you're dealing with a for sale by owner or an unlisted property, then you're going to be doing a little bit more work. And if you're doing more work, I think you're earning a little bit more commission. Okay. So I would be a little generous for yourself here. All right. Let me go see what's going on in the chat. Okay. If you agree to the commission listed on the MLS, how do we illustrate that on this paragraph? Karen, I recommend you do it verbally. Wait for the objection to come up. Okay. Then when you show them a property, and let's say hypothetically, you've got X here in for a 1, but you're only being offered Y by the listing agent, but you're happy to take Y from the listing agent, okay? You can either use the C.A.R. form to say that's what you're willing to accept, okay? Or you can just give it to them in writing on a piece of paper, okay? As long as your broker is on board with it, as long as it's on board with it. First, have that conversation verbally with them, okay? And then after you do that, but before they write the offer, you want to reduce it in writing. So they have it in writing what they're obligated to, okay? Good explanation of the commission session. Thank you, Linda. And you've been in the business a long time. I appreciate your nod there, because it is a touchy situation. But as an educator, I really need to explain the details. It'd be so much easier if I was in your office and we didn't have the price fixing issue come at us. Okay. If verbally should not be documented in this conversation as well. Again, you start out verbal, let them know what's going on, and then you put it in writing. Okay. Do the explanation, have that verbal, and then after you do that, document it in writing so they know what it is. But if you just throw it at them in writing, I mean, they're going to go, well, no, verbally walk them through it, then document it in writing. The safest way, because you don't want any misunderstandings here. All right. Okay. So conceptually now, okay, we've got the commission. B, broker's right to compensation. Okay. This is the enforceability paragraph. B1, non-exclusive. That's where you have to be representing the buyer. You have to be showing the buyer the property. You have to be discussing the property with the buyer. If they buy it from somebody else, then you get a commission. But if they find it on their own, they go to an open house, or that trickle system from the MLS that just automatically sends them listings. If you didn't discuss that listing with them and they buy it through somebody else, no commission is owed. You get nothing. And again, the question then often pops up, well, how do I document that I really talked to them about this property? Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. And that's why I don't like B1. And that's why I don't recommend B1. I go with B2. Check the box for B2. That means it's exclusive representation. That means if the buyer buys a property during the term of this agreement, you get paid. You're owed a commission. End of story. It makes it the exclusive right to sell, not the open listing. If you like open listings, go with B1. If you like exclusive right to sell listings, go with B2. That's the best I can give it to you, right? Okay, moving on. Cancellation of buyer representation agreement, okay? All right, so either can cancel after giving notice, but if you have the exclusive, in other words, back in B2, you check the box. If you have the exclusive, then the parties have to give them to each other a 30-day notice. Okay, then they have to give a 30-day notice, which creates a little bit of a problem if you only take this agreement for 1 day, doesn't it? Again, I don't think C.A.R.'s team that put this document together with the changes really used it. They certainly didn't attend one of my classes, but again, I expect this to get worked out as people start using it. All right. Okay. Neither party has the right to cancel agreements prior to expiration except by mutual agreement. Okay. That's paragraph C2. So I actually like to go with C2. The default language is 30 days if you're doing the exclusive representation. But I prefer to go with C2. If you have reluctance from your buyer of signing this, again, make it for 0 days, make it for 1 day. Okay, that's my recommendation. There should be no problem with a buyer entering this agreement. It's only going to be for 1 day. Moving on. So accounting and payments to broker by others. Notice D1. If anyone other than the buyer compensate broker for their services, that amount shall be credited towards buyer's obligation to pay compensation. Okay. So you see, the seller via the listing agent is going to be offering a commission to you through the MLS. Presumably that is sufficient. So your buyer doesn't have to pay anything. So now your buyer's probably saying, well, wait a minute. If you're getting paid through the MLS, and I'm not going to be obligated to pay, why am I signing this agreement? And that's where you're going to come back with the benefits. Look, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, while we all think about the MLS as being the universe of properties available, it really isn't. There are for sale by owners out there. There are properties that were on the market and expired for a variety of reasons. Sometimes listings just get canceled for who knows why. Under this agreement, I'm now empowered to contact those sellers on your behalf to see if they'd be interested in selling to you. And if so, with your permission, I will ask them if they will pay my commission, which presumably they will, and I'll explain why. So it's not going to cost you anything, but I can't talk to them without being your agent because I need your authority to represent you in communicating to them. And I don't have that authority without this agreement. This agreement creates that agency relationship that gives me that written authority. Now, what do we know about for sale by owners? So I'm really kind of talking to you guys here. Not really probably going to, I would say something similar to this to a buyer. But let me talk to you about it because it's more fun to talk agent to agent, or somebody should say real estate licensee to real estate licensee. Two things we know about for sale by owners, right? Number one, they're cheap, right? They don't want to pay a commission. They're cheap. What's the second thing we know about for sale by owners? They don't know what they're doing. They're actually scared. They don't know what they're doing. They're cheap and they don't know what they're doing. So when you approach a for sale by owner does not want to give you a commission, and they're thinking what? Well, what TV ads say, 6%. That's what they say on the TV. So that's what they're thinking. You don't tell them that. You tell them what? 3 or something else. And they're thinking, wow, I just saved commission. And they like that. Why? Because they're cheap. And I got an agent. I got an agent who's going to help do this thing because I don't know what I'm doing. What could be better? I have yet to meet a for sale by owner. Well, as long as they've been on the market for at least 3 or 4 weeks, okay? Don't try to do this with a for sale by owner the first weekend on their open houses. No. You got to give them a couple of weeks before they realize they can't really do it on their own. But I've never met a for sale by owner or an unlisted property that wouldn't pay you the buyer side of a commission because they think they're doing it for half price, cheap. And 2, they don't know what they're doing. You're going to help them through this, right? Works every time. Explain that process to the buyer. You might even say, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I had a situation once where the buyer told me that they really liked a particular house. They saw it like 6 or 8 months ago. You know, it's been sold. You know, it's not available anymore. But gosh, they really like that house. Say, do you remember the address? And I go, well, yeah. And they give you the address. I go, great. You contact your title company with that address and say, hey, would you pull up all the properties in this neighborhood with that square footage? You ever notice in a neighborhood, track, each model has its own square footage. So you can get that square footage. You can pull up, your title company will give you the contact information for every property with that square footage, which is the same model. You can then contact all of those property owners. Title company may be able to give you the phone number. Don't worry about the do not call list because it doesn't apply to you because you're not soliciting for a listing. You're representing your buyer. And here's your script. Hi, Mr. Property Owner. I need to confess, I'm a real estate licensee, but I'm not asking for a listing. I have a buyer under contract who's asked me to find your home model. And I was wondering if you might be interested in entertaining an offer. You do that with 25, 30 property owners, you'll get 6 or 7 of them will say yes, just because they're curious, right? And then you say, my buyer has also asked, will you pay my commission of whatever it is here in the agreement? 3, 2, 2.5, whatever it is you do, right? What are they thinking? Hey, list with these other agents, they're going to charge me X. You're only charging me Y. And I got someone to help me because I don't know what we're doing, right? Explain that to your buyers. This document allows you to represent them more effectively. So it's actually a win-win for them. The exclusive right to sell helps the seller get their property sold fastest, right? Buyer representation broker compensation agreement allows you to more effectively represent the buyer. End of story, right? Okay. Now, paragraph 3D, okay? Let me back up. Paragraph 2D2, okay? Paragraph 2D2. What if more is being offered in the MLS than the buyer has agreed to pay under this agreement? In other words, there's a surplus. Paragraph D2 says you get to keep it. Unless you check the box there in D2, that means it goes to the buyer. Don't check the box. Moreover, Ed says, better to put in this agreement a little bit more so you don't have to face that awkward situation where the buyer is asking for the difference that's coming through the MLS. And then you can be the nice guy by telling the buyer, the listing agent is offering less than what you've agreed, but I've talked to my broker, my manager, we are not going to ask for the difference from you. That would be the example of your listing agreement, which means your buyer representation agreement has the buyer paying X, but you're only getting Y from the listing agent. However, if that listing agent is offering an ridiculous amount, like $2.50, you can, under the CBC, Cooperative Broker Compensation Agreement, okay, request that the listing agent increase the amount of commission if your buyer authorizes you to do so. Oh, there's another script for you that you might find interesting. Buyers have heard of these discount, limited service, brokerage models out there on TV, right? Okay. You can tell them that there are a number of listings in the MLS where the compensation is $2.50. You've all seen them, right? Frequently, they're open listings. If you ever call the agent, you know what they'll tell you? Just deal directly with the seller. I'm out of it. Okay. And I actually wrote an offer for myself and my wife when we got married on one of those listings. I came and sat down with the seller, presented my offer, and then I said, do you remember when, then I said, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about commission. And my broker said to discuss that with you. True story. The wife looked at her husband and said, Bob, remember whatever every agent said, if a guy comes in with an offer, we have to pay him 3%. True story. Easiest commission I ever made. Those sellers are typically prepared to pay a commission. Their agent has told them that they're putting it on the MLS, but if another agent brings in an offer, you're going to have to pay them a commission. They know that. They've been told that. You don't know they know that because you've never presented an offer to them, because at $2.50, you may not show the property. But under this agreement, under the buyer representation agreement, you can, and you can ask for your commission because your broker or your buyer has empowered you to do so. Explain that to your buyers. They don't know how the business works. Explain that you can now show them more properties. You can show them properties that no one else is going to show them. Okay. Paragraph 3D, authorization to include commission in the offer. So there's two ways to verify that you're actually going to be getting your commission, okay, from the seller. You can either use the single party compensation agreement, which I actually prefer, or you can now actually put it in the offer. So with the new version of the RPA that came out last December 2021, December 2022, last month, okay, it actually says in there, there's a box to check where you can ask the seller to pay a commission. I don't like it because it looks like your commission is now part of the negotiation, and that could affect an NAR ethics code issue. I'd rather you use the single party compensation agreement, have that signed by the seller first, then present the offer. So if you get a for sale by owner who says, yes, I will pay you a commission, you go, great. You show the property to your buyer, let your buyer write the offer, go back, and at that point, have the seller sign an agency disclosure. I'm not sure you're legally required to do, but I'd play it safe and have them do one. Have them sign that BRBC, possible representation, more than by one buyer and seller. Have them sign the single party compensation agreement, that's the SP form. And then just for good measure, the seller non-agency form, the SNA. The seller non-agency form says, I'm not your agent. So they can't come back and then claim that you had some fiduciary duty to represent them. No, get that SNA form signed and then present the offer to them. That's the way I would do it. Okay, we've got a couple things in the chat. Let me go to the chat. Can you explain D2 and D3 again? SNA only for FSBOs. The SNA is for any unrepresented seller. So if you have a seller that doesn't have an agent, or you find yourself in what I call these entry only, where the agent takes an upfront fee, puts it on the MLS and offers $2.50, but they're nowhere to be found, I would use the SNA. So the seller non-agency should be used whenever you don't have an agent representing a seller, because it states in writing, you're not their agent, and you owe them no fiduciary duty. All right? Okay. So D2 and D3 again. Happy to go through it real quick. And you know, I'll be around here afterwards if you have a question. So we can just turn off the recording and we can chat open mic. Okay, so D1, okay, says that if you are being compensated through the MLS, that will offset what the buyer owes. There's really no downside to this agreement. D2 says if you get more from the MLS than what the buyer owes under this agreement, you get to keep it, unless you check the box. Don't check the box. D3 says that you are allowed to check the box on the purchase agreement, thereby making your offer contingent on you getting paid by the seller. Okay. Again, I like the single party compensation agreement better. Okay. I think even if you do check the box in the purchase agreement, I still like that single party compensation agreement better. Okay. I'm old school. Okay. But that's how I would like to do it. All right. Let me go back into the chat. We've got more stuff coming in. More stuff coming in is Laura. Okay. So sounds like I got it right. Okay. Moving on. Additional broker right to compensation. Okay, so here is the safety clause. It's actually very similar to what you have in the listing agreement. Okay. And what it says is if the buyer buys one of the properties, okay, that you showed them, and you inform them in writing what those properties were, then you're entitled to be paid. Okay. Then you're entitled to be paid. Okay. So again, going back up to, where are we? 4A. Okay. There's your compensation. Okay. And it says here, broker shall be entitled compensation within if within blank calendar days after expiration or any extension thereof. Okay. So you actually fill in the amount of time. I think I might have earlier said 5 days. Okay. I keep getting my days confused. I would put in there anywhere from 3 to 5 days. But remember what I said earlier. After you say goodbye to your buyer, go to your computer, send an email, go to your computer, type out a letter, go to your computer, use a C.A.R. form, but immediately notify the buyer of those properties to make sure you're safe, so you don't forget about it, okay? But you do need to let them know what properties you discussed with them, what properties you showed them, so that you're protected, okay, for that period of time, okay? Okay, so, okay, hold on, I messed up. Let me go back, okay? Here, 3E, I said 3 to 5 days. No. This is your extension period. Again, I apologize. It is my first time teaching this class. You need to put in the amount of time for your protection period, okay? The amount of time for your protection period. So I recommend 30 to 45 days, okay? Here under E, 30 to 45 days. I'm sorry, I thought it was the notice period. It's not the notice period. It is the period of time which the protection will run for. So my recommendation is a minimum of 30 days to a maximum of 45, maybe 60 days. I mean, how long do you think this buyer in this market will wait to write an offer on this? Okay. So again, you want to put in the protection period here, minimum of 30 days, maybe 45 or 60 days. Again, I apologize for that. First time through the form, I'm going to have a few hiccups. All righty. So now we go into the next page, page 2. So F, disclosure of anticipated payments to broker by others. Again, you will disclose in writing okay, before writing an offer, or you check the box showing the property, how much compensation you're getting from the listing agent. Okay. Now you can either do that by giving them a copy of the MLS showing the amount, or you can use this new C.A.R. form that's referenced here, the ABCD. Okay, so that's a new form that just came out last December, last month. Okay, the ABCD form. So you do need to let them know either before showing the property or before writing an offer on the property. The default language is before writing an offer on the property, or if you check the box before showing the property. I tell them verbally before showing them the property, and then do it in writing before you write the offer. Okay. Timing of compensation. Okay. Typically at close of escrow, or if the buyer defaults, the buyer owes you a commission if they breach the contract. Or if the seller defaults and the buyer sues the seller and collects, you get half of what the buyer collects, not to exceed your commission, which is very similar to what's in the listing agreement. All right. So paragraph H, payment will be done through escrow. Okay. Paragraph I, pre-existing broker buyer representation and compensation benefits. Again, if the buyer has informed you back in paragraph 2 that there is another agent, perhaps that other agent gave them a list of properties that they had been shown, and those list of properties are under the safety clause of that earlier agreement, and that was disclosed to you, then they're not obligated to pay you a commission on one of those properties. Otherwise, they'd be obligated to pay 2 commissions to 2 agents. All right. And then paragraph 5 is our agency disclosure. We have given them the AD form, which I've already talked about, and they have received the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. Paragraph 6, simply the broker authorizations, what we are now empowered to do. Okay. What we will do, reasonable skill, diligence, help them. Paragraph 7, buyer obligations. Okay. Buyers can act in good faith. Paragraph 7, the buyer is going to allow themselves to get pre-approved or pre-qualified, okay, within 5 calendar days of this agreement. Okay. Buyer's going to use reasonable care and skill. Buyer's going to pay for any reports that they order. Paragraph 7E, if the buyer has any material issues that a property must have or cannot have. I mean, some buyers demand that the property have air conditioning, or a property cannot have a pool, or the property must have a spa, or something like that. You can identify that on the BMI form, buyer material issue form, and that's what that form is used for. You've probably never seen the BMI because the only place you see a reference to it is in this agreement. Okay. Buyer agrees to indemnify and hold broker harmless for any incorrect, incomplete, or inaccurate information they provide to you. Okay. Paragraph 8 is a little bit of a change. Okay. It says that both buyer and broker will be responsible for their own attorney's fees. Now, you remember, it used to be prevailing party, the winning party. Of course, that, I think, kind of encouraged buyers and sellers to sue, because if they won, then you'd have to pay their attorney's fees. Well, now it says each pays their own attorney's fees. So maybe our buyers and sellers won't be as interested in suing us, right? But then under paragraph 9, mediation, okay? Mediation is a mandatory part of the contract. The parties agree to mediate if there's a dispute. A mediator is somebody who agreed to by both parties, who will try to get the parties to settle. If the parties settle, then no more dispute. If the parties don't settle, then they can litigate or go to arbitration, right? However, if a party refuses to mediate, okay, then that party who refuses to mediate will have to pay for the attorney's fees of the other party if they win. Okay, so again, that's the carrot and the stick. That's the carrot and the stick. If you refuse to mediate and you lose, you have to pay the other side's attorney's fees, right? One thing that's accepted from mediation, and that is small claims. Okay, so small claims doesn't pertain to mediation, as well as arbitration. Now, there's no arbitration paragraph in this. However, if you want to include arbitration, that's a decision your broker needs to make. If you want to include arbitration, you can with the C.A.R. ARB form, okay, listed right there. And then paragraph 10 is for any advisories that you want to include, okay. Paragraph 10D is not included, but I really like it. It's that statewide buyer-seller advisory, the SBSA. It's a monster. It's like 14 pages. A couple of years ago, they revamped the table of contents page on the second page. It's much more user-friendly now. I strongly encourage you giving that disclosure to all of your buyers, okay? If you have any other terms, you can put those in paragraph 11. Paragraph 12 says this is our entire agreement. There are no other agreements, okay? If you have an entity buyer, in other words, your buyer is a corporation, an LLC, a trust, you would check that box. You would identify the authorized signer, identify the name of the entity and the title of the authorized signer there under B, okay? The nice thing about paragraph 12A is from this point on, whenever that buyer signs or initials something, they're doing so as the authorized representative of the entity. They don't have to restate who they are, right? And then you sign on behalf of your broker. They're on the bottom of the form, okay? So, buyer transactional advisory, this is a disclosure that we now need to give to the buyer when using the new BRBC, right? Mentioned earlier about disclosing the commission that you are receiving from the listing agent for representing the buyer. This is the ABCD form. This is the form that you can do, all right? You can either do it before the showing or you can do it before writing the offer, depending on what the contract says. Now, there is litigation going on currently between the U.S. Department of Justice and the National Association of Realtors, okay? This form is required if you're using the BRBC that we just went over. This form may be required in the future if you're not using the BRBC, okay? As a result of that litigation between the Department of Justice and NAR. So get familiar with this form, because even if you're not using the BRBC, you may still have to use this form in the future, all right? Notice of broker involved property. So remember earlier I said, please send an email to your buyer, notifying them in writing of the buyer properties you showed them. C.A.R. has a form for you to use to notify them, and this is that form, okay? So this is that form that you can use to notify them in writing which properties you showed them. So our takeaway points, and then I'm going to turn off the recording and see if you want to open your mics and ask me any further questions. Number one, if the buyer's reluctant to signing, make the agreement one day, and then use that safety clause to register properties. Remember, in most cases, the seller's going to be paying the commission. The buyer doesn't have to worry about paying a commission anyway, right? We all know this. The only way a buyer would ever risk paying a commission is if they want to buy a property they never would have seen unless they signed the BRBC. Think about that. When would a buyer have to pay a commission if you're using the BRBC? Well, it won't be the property you show them in the MLS, right? It'll be a property that you show them it's a for sale by owner, an unlisted property. Oh yeah, that entry only listing in the MLS for $2.50 that they're offering in commission that most agents would never show anyway, right? Or probably agents won't show. But with the BRBC, you can show those properties. You call those sellers up. You say, I have a broker, I have a buyer under contract. I think they'd like to see your property. Would you be amenable for me to show it? My buyer has also asked that you pay my commission of X%. Are you comfortable doing that? What's in their mind? They're cheap. Yeah, I get to do it at like half price. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, I have an agent to help me through this. Of course, they're going to agree to it because you appeal to their two needs. Cheap, don't know what they're doing. But the buyer's never going to see those properties unless they sign this agreement because you need their authorization under this agreement to show them those properties, right? The BRBC allows agents to show buyers all properties, listed, not listed, whatever the buyer. You're providing greater service. And finally, protects your commission, right? Protects your commission. It maintains that buyer loyalty. Okay. What's the form name after the B? I gave it to you. Okay, it's right there in the thing. The last form does not appear on the handout. Oh, I'm sorry, you got the old handout. Email me, okay? Email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat. Email me. I'll send you anything you want, okay? So I can send you this handout if you want, all right? That's what I'm here for, okay? I think I've covered everything. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to stop the share.